Madam Chair, we are now live.
Thank you. State Board will now come to order. Ms. Marama, would you please call the roll?
Board Member Durham.
Here.
Board Member Skarzica.
Here.
Board Member Esser.
Here.
Board Member McClellan.
Here.
Board Member Rankin.
Here.
Board Member Shuffle.
Here.
Board Member Schroeder.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Colleagues and members of the public, thank you for joining us virtually today. We have a short legislative update, and then we have two other agenda items to address. First item is that update. Ms. Mello, what do you have for us today, please?
I have a lot of bills. I am going to try to go quickly because I acknowledge that we've got some time limits. So if I'm not calibrating, if you want more or less, please don't hesitate to let me know. There's a lot still in play right now, unfortunately. So it's kind of a long list. I wanted to start with 1376, the supportive learning environments for K-12 students. As introduced, the bill had several different components, but one of the core elements was the creation of reports related to chronic absenteeism, suspensions, expulsions, student restraints, referrals to law enforcement, and the number of school-related arrests. It also increased restrictions about the use of restraints on students and allocated some funding to an existing at-risk services program. We discussed this with Rebecca and Steve pretty extensively at our last legislative context meeting, which was on April 20th. At that point, Commissioner Ansys also had asked some questions and relayed some of the challenges she'd been hearing from the field. So we have told the sponsors that the department staff believe that they should try to work with districts to address some of the concerns around the amount and type of data to be collected and around the investigation process for restraints. So we have communicated that much about the bill. We don't have a position on it at this point. I will tell you, it's on the House floor in 5 or 10 minutes, because of course it couldn't be before this meeting or after this meeting. The proponents are working with opponents and there's a ton of amendments flying around. We've seen some of those. So I do think the bill is going to go through some significant changes today on the floor. Exactly how those will settle, I don't know. I think they are getting closer to meeting and addressing the concerns districts have raised about data issues and perhaps also around the investigation of restraints. So that is where the bill is and what's going on.
What's the problem they're trying to solve, please?
This is always hard for me, right? Because I think what they would say is there are concerns about the environment in which some of our students learn. I think they are concerned maybe about that there's maybe too much use of restraints or that we don't understand how restraints are being used, and that there's not a lot of transparency on some of these items that I think they would say are important for how a school functions in school climate.
Okay, so it's essentially a transparency bill for challenges for kids.
I think that's one of the ways that they would argue it, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Could I ask a question?
Madam Chair,
Sorry,
I might just add they may be wanting to provide transparency surrounding prosecutorial discretion as it relates to specific groups of students. So.
Thank you. Board Member Shuffle, you had a question.
Yeah, I just wondered if there's a data privacy issue here that people have raised, because I haven't followed it. But I mean, is there a danger that, well, you've got all this data in one aggregate place on these kids and it's painting a picture of them? I mean, obviously there are danger issues, safety issues. You want information to connect. If it's more like, I don't know, juvenile behavior that's not great but not dangerous, then creating this database and linking it all together can be really hard for a kid to defeat so that they can move on in a positive way after high school. Is that an issue, or is that not even an issue?
Well, I totally understand why you're asking the question, right? I mean, and you're not the only person who's asked that question. What I can tell you is that CDE staff did review, the proponents actually asked staff to review the bill before introduction. We've continued to review it as it's changed. They don't think there's anything in the legislation right now that is in conflict with the data privacy laws that we have on the books. Most of this data, I think all of it actually, is aggregate data. It's not PII. I understand that there could be a PII kind of way down basis because you have to start somewhere to aggregate, right? But in terms of what's being reported out, it's aggregate. There would be suppression issues around that. So the existing policies around suppression would apply, and we've made that clear to folks.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Durham?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. McClellan and Jennifer and I have had a number of conversations about this bill. And usually I like to stay out of these kinds of issues, but I think this one's become compelling enough. I did have a conversation with the person who runs Pikes Peak BOCES earlier this week. And the Pikes Peak BOCES, one of the offerings they have is they actually have about 125 students from 19 different districts who are so severely emotionally disturbed. These in the past few years, he's averaged about $300,000 a year in workers' comp claims driven by attacks on staff by these emotionally disturbed kids. It's his belief that if this bill passes, there's a 50-50 chance he's going to have to close his program. Says the staff is underwater, overworked at the present time. The additional reporting requirements he thinks will break the program. A similar program in Colorado Springs closed. It was a smaller program. This is the largest such program in the state. And there was a corresponding increase in the number of kids who were incarcerated in the actual detention facility. So I think we've reached a point where I think we can show education harm from bills like this. And frankly, the idea, I think this is one more bill that attempts to tie everything to some socioeconomic status when and completely ignoring the issues of individual responsibility and consequences for poor behavior. And admittedly, you're dealing with a very different crowd here, but this is one school executive that I've always taken at his word. He's extremely competent, and I don't think he wasted his time calling me just to cry wolf. I think these are real problems. I think that we should take a position of amending this bill and opposing if it's not properly amended to address the concerns of CASB, or CASE, I guess it is. It's leading the way in trying to reduce some of these reporting requirements. If those aren't successful, then the position becomes opposed. So I'm going to make a motion, which I ordinarily would not do, and I've not had a chance to talk to Ms. McClellan about, that we support amendments to this bill to rationalize the reporting requirements, to ensure that there are no additional constraints put on the ability of a district or a school or a teacher to restrain a child who presents a danger to himself or others, and that absent those corrections in the bill, that the department or that the board take a position against the bill. So I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Board Member Escarzaga, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. I just quickly will support the motion, and I too have heard many similar things that Member Durham just spoke about, particularly just this nebulous idea of reporting, right? And what is it, the notes, you want the notes out of the system? I mean, there's so much reporting and data we have that they collect on the local level that just, I think we need to see perhaps some of the amendments, right? To see what changes, what tightening up there might be on that. But I've heard very similar concerns from other areas of the state that Member Durham just expressed. So thank you.
Board Member McClellan, do you have a comment to add?
Sure, Madam Chair. I did share during our legislative meeting that I had heard from a social worker in my district about safety concerns for teachers and for students, and that looking from the outside, the experience can be very different from what they experience, even when their sympathy goes toward the child who's experiencing the high level of anger that can erupt into violence. In the case that was described to me, that all of the sympathy went to the poor child who was lashing out, but that didn't make it a safe situation. So sometimes when we're looking at these raw statistics and reports, we may not be understanding why restraint may have been necessary for the safety not only of the adults, but of the fellow students as well. So this is a really difficult one, but I can understand why we're seeing agencies weighing in with some concern.
Any other comments, colleagues? Ms. Maramba, I'm hoping that this is an official meeting and we can have motions. I don't remember motions during ledge updates before, but I'm not uncomfortable with that. Can
Yeah, Madam
you?
Chair, that's usually what we do is we formalize positions that are recommended
We do? Okay. Could you
by
call the vote, please?
by your legislative liaisons. It's just unfortunate I did not have a chance to speak with Ms. McClellan after my conversations with the people at Pikes Peak postseason. I apologize for that.
Okay. Ms. Maramba, would you call the vote, please?
Board Member Durham.
Yes.
Board Member Skarziga.
Yes?
Board Member Esser.
Yes.
Board Member McClellan.
Yes.
Board Member Rankin.
Yes.
Board Member Shuffle.
Yes.
Board Member Schroeder.
Yes.
It passes 7-0.
Thank you. Ms. Mello, back to you.
Great.
Please keep us posted
Absolutely.
today.
Yeah. There. I think what I'm probably going to do is not send you out a report today, like my weekly report. I'm going to wait. They may be meeting tomorrow. I think so much is changing right now that I'd rather be able to report to you all on all the things that changed once we have a chance to get a handle on those. So we'll certainly
Are
update.
you in a position now as a result of this motion to provide some further input to the?
Yes, and I will do so as soon as
Okay.
we finish. Yeah.
Thank you.
Of
Go
course. The second bill I wanted to talk about is House Bill 197 concerning authorizing an alternative governance structure for innovation school zones. This bill, as introduced, essentially, created a process where an innovation zone, in cooperation with the local school board, could create this nonprofit management structure, and it set out a dispute resolution process. The bill was amended pretty substantively, and so I wanted to tell you what happened via amendment, and in particular as it relates to your role as the state board. Now, the bill in its current form, as it comes out of the Senate, kind of has a bifurcated dispute resolution process, is one way to think about it. So disputes that are related to and this is the word it uses, administration of the innovation plan. There's a whole process in the bill to resolve those disputes. You all get notified about that, but you don't have a role in those disputes. However, if the local school board votes to revoke the innovation status, because of academic achievement reasons, then they can appeal to you all, and you all get to make a decision about whether innovation status should continue or discontinue based on academic achievement. Your decision is final and not subject to appeal. So wanted to bring that up to you all. We don't have a position on this bill either right now. I don't know if you want to take one or not, but I wanted to make sure you understood where the bill stood in terms of some of those substantive components.
Board Member Skarziga.
Yeah, just and I had heard this amendment, but just to clarify, that's the only time they can come to the state board is if it's a revocation of the innovation plan is being proposed. That's it. We're
That
out
is
of
my understanding, board member.
Okay, that's what I heard too. So
yeah,
which makes more sense to me than just having them come for everything that
And things are moving fast and I'm not an attorney, so like those would be my caveats, but I actually just read the bill in the last half hour to make sure I understood it, and that's how I read it.
So help me understand this. I thought this was intended to allow for the innovation zones, but also to make sure that they are the ones who are administrating, who are deciding on waivers, et cetera. And this pretty much puts it back into the hands of the school board, and they can change, for example, their schedule. Well, I'm trying to remember what some of the things were that the Denver School Board wanted to change in innovation schools. That will not be, there'll be no recourse for an innovation zone other than back to the school board.
I don't know that I would put it quite that way, because the bill is very detailed on this dispute resolution process. And essentially they have to go to a neutral third party. And I think what we would all consider an arbitrator, right? Someone playing that role. And that person's decisions are final, right? So I think that it's a level of detail we don't typically see in statute around dispute resolution, right? And it's trying to be really put out in detailed form. If there's a dispute, here's all the different ways in which you guys are going to try to resolve it. And it does provide for a conclusion by this independent third party person that gets hired. Whatever they decide goes.
Who hires them?
So the department has to maintain a list of those types of people or entities that can do that work. And I'd have to look back at the bill to see if it specifies how you agree, how they agree on the person.
Okay, thank you. Pretty complicated.
It is.
Any other questions, colleagues? Go ahead, Ms. Mello.
Okay. Another bill we have not had a chance to talk about because it was introduced after we've last spoke is Senate Bill 207, Prevention of Title IX Misconduct in Public Schools. As introduced, it required public schools to align their misconduct, reporting, and investigation policies with federal law. Yesterday, the bill was in Senate Education Committee. I got to tell you, if anybody was listening to Senate Ed yesterday, it was wild. There was so much stuff that happened in Senate Education yesterday. One of the things that happened is this bill was significantly amended with a strike below that takes out everything from the introduced version and creates a study. We did not, we were working with the bill sponsors. I mean, we got the amendment like 20 minutes before they put it on. We flagged for them that we probably have some implementation concerns. They're willing to work with us on that for second reading. Just some of the, I mean, when things get written quickly like this, you can imagine that it's not always perfect on the first try. So from I think just an implementation perspective, we are still working to clear up some of the details of what that study will look like and how that will happen. But that is where that bill is right now.
Any questions? Go ahead, please.
Okay, we have talked, I think we may have talked more about House Bill 1220, removing barriers to educator prep, than any bill we've ever talked about. It feels like we've been talking about this bill all session, and I think that we have. Again, as a reminder, the biggest parts of the bill are the creation of 2 grant programs that are run by the Department of Higher Education to help student teachers with some of the costs of student teaching and taking tests. There's a part of the bill that's been in there all along about that requires you all, and you retain all the rulemaking authority over this, but to create an alternative pathway to licensure that doesn't require a test. A praxis test, essentially. That's in real terms what we're talking about. We have spent quite a bit of time talking with the proponents about this language. I want to acknowledge that there are members of the board who feel very strongly that that is bad policy and don't like that language, and we have let folks know that that is the case. We've also tried to work to make sure that if it does get adopted, so we don't have a position on the bill, but that your staff can implement it, right? I would say as introduced, it was not written in a way that Dr. O'Neill and her staff felt they couldn't even understand what they were being asked to do. So we've done quite a bit of work to make to clear up implementation issues. The most recent that we worked on this week on that, so to create an alternative pathway and have it available to anybody and everybody, the fiscal note that your staff estimated was around $3 million. They couldn't find, the proponents, we weren't involved in this, proponents couldn't find $3 million to fund it. So they put an amendment on an appropriations to say only 15% of people who want to do the alternative pathway can do it. That was not particularly implementable either, right? I mean, who decides what, how do we know which 15% we're talking about? So we met with proponents and Senator Zenzinger, who's the Senate sponsor, earlier this week. Senator Zenzinger was quite helpful. And what they have decided to do is cap it at 1,000 students per year. So students is probably not the right word. No more than 1,000 applicants for licensure can use this alternative process. Dr. O'Neill did express her concerns with that in terms of whether that is good public policy or not in our conversation. I think those concerns were heard. They were not acted upon. So the bill was amended in committee the other day. As it stands, you all still would have to create this alternative licensure pathway, but it would be capped at 1,000 applicants a year.
I don't see how the limit changes the cost, because all the steps that the department has to go through in order to implement this, most of them would occur whether it's 50 applicants a year or 5,000 applicants a year, right? Just setting it up and updating it and paying individuals to participate in this, et cetera.
I think there's two components of the cost. There's the ones you identify, Madam Chair, kind of the upfront costs. Those are still there, and those are funded currently. There is an element of it that has to do with volume, and so if you decrease volume, you can decrease cost.
And how many new licenses are there a year?
We're trying to kind of move relatively quickly, so I'm going to say this, and then Colleen, you text me if I'm wrong, and I'll correct it. I believe that there's a total of about 22,000, somewhere around 22,000 individuals who, in theory, could be that this could apply to every year.
Thank you. Other questions, colleagues?
So how big is the fiscal note if it is in fact capped at 1,000?
I do not have that off the top of my head. Sure, I'm happy to try to pull that up if you'd like me to.
I just think we need to make sure this is realistic, that the number that amount of money we're going to get is realistic.
Yes, and we have been very vigilant to, I mean, that's why we said to them, this doesn't make sense, this 15%. I mean, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to make it match the fiscal note, but it doesn't. So we've been very active, I would say, to make sure that the statutory language matches the fiscal note and that the activities that the department is expected to do are funded at the level the department thinks that they need funding for.
So have they found enough money for the 15%? What they get, 300,000?
I don't know the exact numbers, but yes, they have been allocated dollars in the legislation.
It would be 15% of 3 million would be 450,000.
I think it's actually more than that, because there's the startup costs that don't change the number of students. And then, so there's a set amount of costs that are funded, and then there's the per applicant amount for the 1,000. I can pull all of that and send it to you all in more detail. I'm happy to do that.
When does this take effect?
See, I should have printed this one and not the other. I didn't print a copy of it. I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me right now.
Why don't you just send us an update when you can?
I will do that.
Well, I think for the record,
Mr. Durham, go ahead.
I think for the record that I've thought this is a bad bill all along. I know it's got the other goodies in it, so it's probably going to pass. But this this is one of the more stupid practices of the General Assembly to partially fund, even if it's a good idea, it's a bad idea to partially fund something. Either you have the money for it or you don't. And so when you look at the cost per licensure, we're going to have to budget in fixed costs and try to estimate some variables beyond that. It really makes no sense. I think we ought to oppose the bill with this position if this remains in it in this form. Give them a chance to take it out. But I think we ought to be on record of saying we believe this is a bad idea. It's a really bad idea in the form of partial funding. So I'll make a motion to oppose the bill in its present form and ask for this section to be either be fully funded or deleted.
Is there a second? Do I have a second to the motion?
Second.
Thank you. Board Member Rankin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It seems to me that we keep getting these bills, alternative pathways, and I don't know how they all align with each other or how some are better. Do we ever go back and review these and see if how many teachers end up in our system that are, get good evaluations? To have one that costs us money and they don't have to take a test, removal of the test. I'm a little confused, and I have to admit I have not read that bill, but it seems to me, are we trying to lower the standards in order to get more teachers? Are we becoming desperate? Is this totally different than any other alternative program we have? And how does it differ? I just seem to have a lot of questions, and I would like to know more answers before I would approve of a bill like that.
So I've done some research because I've been deeply concerned about this bill. There are other states that have tried to modify, but it's usually after a candidate has had an opportunity to fail several times. And there's just sort of a different process of demonstrating as opposed to just a carte blanche. You're not going to do the assessment. And then there are some that only have it available, have that particular feature available for a year or two, partly to deal with the post-pandemic issues. So there are some other models out there. I don't get a sense that our legislature has looked at those. There are other models. Do you have further question, or I'll go to the next person? Board Member Rankin? Microphone. Microphone.
Sorry. Yes, I do have some further questions, which is, what does this apply to? I mean, if it's only higher ed, is it the end of course assessment that is required by that institution? Or is it, well, if you take the READACT training, you don't have to, and you can still teach reading in K3. And maybe that's in the bill. I just don't want it to negate things that are already in place.
I will say one of the changes that we asked for and did receive was language that makes it very clear that nothing in this bill overrides anything in the READ Act. So all of the requirements that are affiliated with the READ Act still stand.
Thank you.
So it's content. Do you have basic content knowledge? Do you know math? Do you know science, etc.? It's a relatively basic test. Board Member McClellan, I think your hand up was next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'm just going to reiterate what I've shared previously. There's a lot to like in this bill with the grant funding that this provides, particularly in this climate where we're trying to help schools and districts keep their classrooms staffed. But the concern I'm having is that it's up to us to hear the accountability cases when things don't go well. And if we have sort of participated in greasing the skids to allow teachers that, for whatever reason, cannot pass the subject test, the content knowledge, and that comes up as part of the equation on one of our accountability hearings, then we will appear to have been part of the problem, is my worry. You know, so I've stated that before. Is this something that we can achieve just as well through an amend position? Do we have to? I wish we could untie the elements of this bill and vote for the ones that we like, but that's not up to us. But is this a situation where we could achieve what we want to achieve with an amend position as opposed to an oppose?
I don't know if that's a question for me. Perhaps it is.
You or Mr. Durham, maybe.
Okay, and I'm sorry, my computer wanted to pop up some windows there. I have to be candid in that I think it is unlikely that we will be able to either kill the bill in its entirety if we take an opposed position or make any substantive changes. At this point, the department is the only entity, and this has actually been true all along, that has expressed concerns. There's lots of folks supporting it. There's lots of folks who are just monitoring it and kind of staying out of it. We've been the ones on this drumbeat, and we've worked really hard to try to, you know, beat those drums in a way that they are heard. But this bill has pretty broad support, and I think it is unlikely that we can make more changes. It doesn't mean I won't try, if that's what you want me to do, but I just want to be realistic with you all.
Board Member Durham.
Sorry. I think it's unlikely that we're going to be able to kill this bill as well. But I think if we, you know, and it may not be an overwhelming majority of the board, but if we believe it's bad policy, it's bad policy, and we probably have an obligation to express that. I would like to say if our rulemaking authority, let me put this as a question to Jennifer. So if our rulemaking authority is as broad as it appears, and we're down to 1,000 applicants, we could in the rule perhaps limit those eligible to use this method as those who've already failed the practice. If we're a little creative, we might be able to eliminate subject matters, or at least demonstrate, or at least intimate in the rules that some subject matters are easier to use portfolios for. For example, mathematics may not lend itself to portfolio approach as well as social sciences. So we may be able in the rules to affect some of the protections we'd like. Seeing what other states do on the failure, I mean, we might try and limit it there. You know, the first 1,000. You know, if we get 1,000 applicants, the ones that are going to be, or more than 1,000, the ones that are going to be chosen are those that have failed to practice. And so there may be some options for us here but I don't think at this point, I don't think we should let this go as a good idea, because I don't believe it's a good idea. And I think, you know, Ms. Rankin clearly stated that, you know, that she wouldn't support it if it had, you know, affected the READ Act. Well, you've done a good job in getting rid of it affecting the READ Act, and that's a real plus. But I don't think it should affect mathematics either. And so, you know, that's we can't get by that by amendment. We may be able to, and I would encourage us, if this passes, to make sure our rules limit the potential bad impacts of it as much as possible. So
I would just note that we did ask to limit the language to, we actually proposed limiting it to people who had not been able to pass the praxis in 2 attempts. That was rejected the proponents do not agree with that policy. They say they don't want to fail first. You know, I would defer to your legal counsel as to the breadth of your rulemaking authority. I don't know for a fact if your rulemaking authority would be broad enough to do that, but that would be a legal question.
Well, before they limited it to 1,000, we didn't have a rule. There's no necessity for a rule for us to find a limit to who could qualify or who were going to be the 1,000. So unless there's an instruction in the bill otherwise, I'm going to guess that the fact it's limited to 1,000 provides us with additional rulemaking authority, because we have to find a way to limit it. We could do it by lottery. We could do it by some smarter way. So,
And the bill does require a stakeholder process before you adopt the rules. I mean, you still retain the authority as the board about what those rules would look like, but there is input from other constituencies.
so we're not obligated to let stakeholders drive the process. You just have to have one.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
At the end of the day, you all are the elected board and you have the rulemaking authority.
All right.
Board Member McClellan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just thinking, if it's unlikely that we're going to make a difference, and especially given that on this large and complex bill where many of the points and much of the input that has been negotiated are points on which the sponsors have been amenable to listening, I'm not sure I'm comfortable, throwing a shot across the bow on, especially given that the likelihood that it'll make a difference may be highly unlikely. And it's not as though they haven't been flexible on at least some points within this bill. But I'd be interested to hear what colleagues have to say. I don't want to punish these bill sponsors for having been at least somewhat flexible and responsive and listening to concerns up until now, just because we didn't get every last concern heard. I know this one is a source of heartburn, but if it's not going to make a difference anyway, maybe this isn't the one that we go to battle on.
Well, I'll put in, I've been working on teacher licensure issues since, I believe, 1995. And this is a death knell for a lot of so much of what was proposed back then in a teacher bill has been taken out. And we know that the most important feature in learning is the teacher. And if we can't be assured that a teacher has a knowledge of the material that they're trying to teach, what are we doing? Why bother? I mean, I just think this is so much at the core. I'd like to have Board Member Scheffel and Board Member Esser argue with me about this, but this is so core to the essence of what is an effective teacher. Schools of education, who are the ones that are pushing this, are not really assuming responsibility for content. They are assuming responsibility for the teaching skills, and I get that. But somebody has to assume responsibility for content knowledge. And this is legislation that takes it away from us. And I understand the position of higher ed. They want to wash their hands of it because that's where we've sent it back. Board Member Scheffel, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I've been in classrooms where I could tell that the teacher in this, like in an upper elementary, middle school context, really didn't understand the content, and I could see errors that weren't being corrected. And I thought, this is not good for these students. So I really think if we disengage content from pedagogy, the art of teaching and the actual content of what's being taught, I think we further jeopardize the whole system, because education is about learning things. It is about knowledge and content and then application. And of course, art of teaching surrounding that says, well, how do you do it? But really the content is so central to the how do you do it that I don't think they can be uncoupled. So I really think it's not a good piece of legislation for education overall and teacher preparation, mostly the K-12 students who work with these teachers.
Board Member Esser, you want to chime in or not?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
No. Yes, of course I do. And I agree with Dr. Scheffel. They have teachers have to have the basic content before they can teach it. If you don't know how to teach, it doesn't matter if you know the content. If you don't know the content, it doesn't matter if you know how to teach. Those two go hand in hand in the classroom. My experience, though, is not always that the person that scores the highest on the praxis test is necessarily good in the classroom. So it's a combination of both, and it's hard to uncouple those two. And I've always taken the praxis in my own areas where I taught, because you don't know what it's asking. It's just like with the CMAS, we don't know what it's asking if no one's taking the test. So I've always taken my own content area. I don't know if Dr. Scheffel also takes the praxis every now and again, just to make sure everybody knows what's on it. Because if it's not the highest of qualities, it's not helpful.
Yeah, we assign our faculty take it in various areas periodically just to ensure that we're aligning with what that content is. So it's very helpful to know what's being asked. We know that no assessment or test is perfect, that there are always issues with the clarity of the questions and the nature of the way the response is required and all that. That said, we still need content knowledge and proxies for it if the test itself isn't working, but we need content knowledge.
Agreed.
So can you come up with a proxy for basic understanding of math?
That would be
I mean, this
difficult.
is an attempt to find an alternative way to demonstrate. I mean, first of all, we can't even be sure that whatever is submitted actually was done by the candidate. That's a security issue that I don't know that they address in the bill. That's something else. But how do you demonstrate without actually doing problems, problems, what your basic understanding is? I do know for sure that there are elementary school teachers who do not know fractions and percentages.
So we've used worked problems. I mean, if you watch somebody work problems, you can tell if they know what they're doing, and you could.
But I don't know of anything else to. I don't know of anything else to substitute for that.
No, not really. You could videotape it and have somebody watch it, but I mean that would be very time intensive and resource intensive. But watching someone do problems is very, very instructive. It's not realistic.
So thanks for hearing me out, Mr. Durham. Do you still have your? I mean, I oppose the bill, but I'm probably the only one.
Well, no, I think we might be the only two, but I mean, maybe it's a good idea to just withdraw the motion, ask Ms. Mello to express our concerns once again and ask the provision to be removed, particularly with the funding change, which I think makes the administration potentially a joke. You know, how you're going to pick, you'd hope you wouldn't get more than 1,000 applications, but you know, I guess I wouldn't be surprised if to avoid the test, you might get inundated with them. And I would say if we run out of money to do this, then we just stop taking the applications and cite funding lapses, because this is just and I think there's little chance there's going to be this kind of money available in the future. If my tea leaves reading for the budgets in the future suggests that the legislature is going to be able to add $3 or $4 million to our processes to get this up to where we could do it on a regular basis, we're going to be rationing this forever and we're probably, no matter how you decide to ration it, for some it will be an irrational basis of rationing. So
I mean, if we vote on this, I would be a no vote as well, just because I just think it's bad for education.
Yeah. So I don't.
Members,
you know,
go ahead.
I don't care. I mean, I don't know that we want to, because I think Ms. McClellan makes a good point. The sponsors, at least, I think, did try and work with us in good faith for a lot of issues, and maybe we need to acknowledge that in some fashion. But it doesn't change the fact this is a bad result. And maybe the good news is, with the limited to 1,000, we can limit the damage. So.
Board Member Skarzica.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think I would argue with anything that's been said at this point. I was thinking that as long as we have Colleen looking up some things, I would like to have numbers or more updated numbers on the number of out-of-field teachers that we have currently serving in our state, which I believe is thousands of teachers that don't have a bachelor's, haven't passed the praxis, don't have the hours, the additional hours that are required. It's the out-of-field definition the board put in years ago, but I would like an updated report on that to just help us balance as we talk about this all the time about the need for requirements for teacher relationships. So thank you.
I will add that to the list of follow-ups for you all.
Not today or tomorrow. She's got, but thank you.
Board Member Sheffel?
Yeah, just one final comment. I mean, I know what you're saying, Member Durham, about the 1,000 teachers and at least there's parameters, but truthfully, look at 1,000 teachers and the students in their classes over time. Look at the thousands of kids they would influence. So I would argue even at 1,000, it's just not a good idea. It's not moving in the right direction as far as making education better for our students.
Okay. All right, I'll sustain the motion and let's just, when we're ready to vote on it, fine.
So there's one more thing that I would just point out, again, given my history, way back when we were looking at pass rates. The problem that schools of education were finding back when we had a required basic skills test for candidates is that the candidates of color did not do as well. In other words, the fail rates were highest among that group. These are the candidates who I think were worried about getting into teaching because we know we want them to be teachers. And yet, if we bring them in by some other way and they don't have content knowledge and they are put before kids of color who need the best teacher, not the weakest teacher, we're perpetuating a situation where some kids just don't get the same quality of education. And this, honestly, this bill breaks my heart. I can't say that I've ever had one that set me, maybe I'm losing my memory, that set me off quite as much as this one because it goes so contrary to what we want for kids, for all kids, but especially for our neediest kids. It potentially perpetuates a really bad situation. So I'm done. Don't ask me about this ever again because off I go. Oh, do we have a motion on the floor?
We do.
With a second. Ms. Maramba, would you call the vote, please? Actually, would you repeat the motion as well?
I would have to ask Board Member Durham, the maker of the motion, to do that, Madam Chair.
Yeah, the motion was to oppose the bill. So you could characterize it as an amend motion to amend the bill to remove the 1,000 provision for 1,000 people to be able to take advantage of this particular alternative program. And in failing that, at the end of the day, we oppose the bill. So it's a motion to attempt to amend and failing to gain for the amendment to pass, then to oppose the bill.
Can I apologize. I just need clarity on you want us to remove the language entirely, this whole
Entirely.
of an alternative? Okay, thank you. Okay.
They're not going to add much. So they must have gotten 300,000 out of that pool, Jennifer, of 40 million.
I think it's actually closer to 800 or 900,000 based on some texts I've gotten.
So we're going to we'll have enough money to build the infrastructure. Maybe.
Well, and again, and I apologize, I'm not trying to slow us down. If you want me to go make this change, I gotta be.
No, that's fine.
Asking you to do.
Let's just oppose it absent the removal of the entire provision.
Okay, I think thank you. I understand.
Whoever seconded that, who seconded it? Did it?
I
Board
think.
Member Sheffel?
Help, I didn't get it.
Board Member
I-
Sheffel seconded.
Okay, go ahead, Board Member Sheffel. Do you have?
Can I just have a clarifying question? If you take out the language for the 1,000, does that mean 5,000 could take advantage of it? I mean, what does it mean to take that out?
No, it means to take out all of the alternative language in the bill, so that we just remove that section of the bill, which would include the limit. So
I think the entire section of the bill that requires the creation of an alternative pathway
right.
asking to have that whole section taken out, is how I'm interpreting.
And that only leaves in the bill in the grant programs, which are popular.
Correct.
Thank you.
Ms. Marambo, did you call the, oh wait, Ms. McClellan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does it help to know that there is a bill that's passed to require first-time pass rates disaggregated by teacher prep program? Because that still allows us to circle back and kind of target those.
That's already, that is everywhere. If you go to the TNTP, I don't remember the organization, all that information is by school.
So it still allows us to go back and zero in on the problem spots we may have if we've got particular institutions that need greater attention in that regard.
Well, yeah. I don't think I want to get into that, but let's just say that the institutions that pass that create the most teachers are the ones that have some of the poorest pass rates. That doesn't, I don't see where that's going to help anything.
I do understand your concern, Madam Chair, and I will share with you that has been the basis of my not having pushed for a support position, because I did understand your input and understood where you were coming from, particularly with the historical experience of having witnessed how a similar measure went in the past. I'm still remaining a little bit concerned about kind of going to battle with these legislators if the passage of this bill is a foregone conclusion and they've been reasonably cooperative on so many other issues. So this is a tough one for me, but I don't want you to feel that you haven't been heard.
Thank you. Board Member Esser?
I just wanted, there's an issue here that we haven't addressed. I believe Colleen O'Neill put up a number, 24,000 teachers are out of field, meaning they're teaching in a subject area that they didn't take the praxis, and they're teaching in that area because there's no teacher to fill that particular position right now.
Actually,
we don't solve that problem with this by any stretch of the imagination. Did I miss something, or do I have that wrong? And that might be Colleen that needs to answer that.
Yeah,
Dr. O'Neill, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to clarify that number was from a previous question a long time ago. So I think that's the problem with the chat. Sometimes we just put the number without the context. So I don't think that's the number for out of field teaching. And so Dr. O'Neill, if you need to pop on to clarify, please do.
24,000, that's what I saw. That
yeah,
was 1122.
I'll go ahead. And this is Dr. O'Neill. I apologize. My camera is not working for some reason today, so I apologize that it's voice only today. We have 24,000 initial teacher licenses. That was a question very early on in the conversation. I apologize for the lack of clarity around that. I'm looking on the number of the out-of-field educators under ESEA, so Every Student Succeeds Act. So I will, or ESSA, I will make sure that we get that number. It used to be 14% of our educators. We have about 56,000 educators, and about 14% used to be out of field in some capacity. We will be looking for that number, and we'll make sure and get back to you with that updated, clear number.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. Are we ready for a vote? Ms. Marambo?
Board Member Durham.
Yes.
Board Member Skarziga.
No.
Member Esser.
No.
Board Member McClellan.
No.
Board Member Rankin.
Yes.
Board Member Shuffle.
Yes.
Board Schroeder.
Yes.
So the motion passes 4-3.
Great. Thank you. That was a robust discussion, and I appreciate the passion and the intensity around this issue. You all have a robust agenda after we get done with legislation, so I'm going to truncate the rest of what I'm going to do. with your permission, and if there's something I don't bring up when I get to the end, if I haven't brought something up that you still really want to talk about, please don't hesitate to let me know. I'm going to do my best on the fly here to try to prioritize based on timing. The next bill I wanted to bring up was Senate Bill 144, the public and nonprofit entities rideshare contracts. This is a bill we've had a fair amount of discussion about. We are at a monitor position on it. The bill is through the House as of this morning. It just passed the House this morning. It will have to go back to the Senate because the House made quite a bit of changes to it. I would characterize in general the changes made in the House as putting additional safety and security requirements into the legislation and requiring the PUC would still maintain the authority to do rulemaking for these types for companies that are transportation network companies or TNCs. But the legislation got much more specific about some of the safety requirements that they would need to encompass in those regulations. And it does require coordination with the Department of Education. And that's where the bill stands right now.
Has anybody actually looked to see what the differences are in the requirements from the Department of Education versus PUC? I mean, is it a dramatic difference? Did anybody do any kind of a crosswalk or?
I guess what I would say is I think the PUC regulates transportation network companies as one type of entity, right? So Uber, Lyft, Hop, Skip, Drive, all of these companies are regulated as kind of one type of company. It's not that they're regulated. It's not specific to school transportation. I think that's part of why there's been a fair amount of policy controversy around this. So no, I don't think in the past the PUC regulations have been anywhere near as specific or detailed as CDE's regulations.
Okay, thank you. Board Member McClellan, did you have your hands up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Mello, do we know if this bill with its current amendments would still allow compelling parents to sign arbitration agreements before receiving services to which their student is already entitled?
Board Member McClellan, I apologize. I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head. I'm happy to try to find out.
Okay. And then am I correct that up until the moment that it's finalized, we won't know what amendments might be stripped? Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. When the bill goes back to the Senate could choose to reject the changes done in the House and ask for a conference committee. There's any variety of directions that could still go.
All right, thank you.
No further questions. Proceed.
Okay. Just two more bills to highlight real quick. They're both new bills that we haven't had a chance to talk about. The first one is 1395. It creates a competitive transportation innovation grant program within CDE. This bill was in House Education earlier this week. I do not think this bill is going to move much further through the process because I do not believe the proponents have been able to identify a funding source for the legislation. I could be wrong about that, but that's, I think, where things stand right now. And then the last one I wanted to highlight was 1396, which would create a Math Achievement Accelerator grant program within the Department of Education. I think there's some sentiment amongst legislators that we've done a lot of focus on literacy, and literacy is really important. Math is also really important. I think that's the motivation for this legislation. Also in House Education earlier this week, I also think that they are not going to, they have yet to identify a funding source, and I'm not sure that that will change. So I don't know that this bill will proceed much farther through the process. Those are the ones I wanted to highlight for you all. I mean, again, it's a little bit of an edited list. So if there's something I've missed or you want to talk about, please, I'm happy to do my best on anything else.
Colleagues, anything else? Thank you very much, Ms. Mello. We will see you in a couple of weeks at our next meeting. Whoops. Mrs. Dr. Escarzica.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was waving goodbye to her.
Oh.
I will see you all.
My hands underneath my lap.
Yeah, I'll be at your board meeting on the last day, which will be at the same as the last day of session. It's often like that. And of course, we will work on an end of session report, that will pull all of this together. It's going to take a little time to pull that together because there's been so much moving at the end, but you will get comprehensive feedback in May. Okay, thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. So colleagues, the next item on the agenda is a discussion about possible transportation options to address barriers to public school choice in districts with board-directed action. Included in this agenda item is a possible notice of rulemaking transportation resources for students in low-performing schools, 1 CCR 301-114. Is staff prepared to provide an overview, Commissioner?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is an item that several board members wanted us to investigate, so we're prepared. After lots of work, I do want to thank Deputy Pearson and also a lot of other staff behind the scenes that helped to pull some of this together rather quickly. I am going to turn this over to Deputy Commissioner Alyssa Pearson.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay with you all so I can display the PowerPoint and talk through it with you. So just give me a moment to get that shared and working. Which isn't connecting for some reason, of course.
So colleagues, just know that you are teeny tiny now on my screen. So you'll need to use that yellow hand because I think that will show up. But if you just raise your hand, I may not be able to see it.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Nope. You can. Okay. Everything just froze on my computer. So I'm going to leave Teams for a moment and come right back in and see if that works. Because I can't make anything work. I can't change slides right now. So I'll be right back. Although it won't let me leave either.
Let's see. Melissa Bloom, are you on? Do you have the PowerPoint slides? Could you share your screen? And of course, Alyssa can't get out of her share screen now.
I don't know. This is the weirdest thing. Everything is. Oh, wait. Maybe it's working. Just a sec. Oh. Oh, odd.
I'm sorry
how
this
about I
is happening, Alyssa, but I'm really glad it happens to somebody once in a while.
It is moving now. Hold on. I'm going to cancel out of Teams and then come right back in. If you guys want to do your last agenda item, we could do that if you don't want to wait for me. I'm really sorry. I don't know what's going on.
That's a good idea. Board Chair Schroeder, do you want to take up the last issue, which is the discussion on Adams 14 School District Emergency Motion for clarification?
Yep, I will do that. So regarding accountability case number 17 AR10 concerning Adams 14 School District and Adams City High School, at our board meeting, we passed 2 motions to ask the district for more information. A week ago, we received an emergency motion for clarification from the district. This was sent to us by the district's legal counsel and is available on board docs, and I'm sure you have seen it. The State Board Office responded to the district counsel with clarification on Tuesday, and that email was also on board docs. It was written by Ms. Maramba. Legal counsel, would you mind preparing a short overview, and then I think we need to have a motion. Do we have legal counsel?
Good afternoon, board members. This is Isabel. I can step in for Julie on this one. Or Julie, if you want to take it, I saw you just popped on.
No, you're fine. I was again having my problem with too many screens open and trying to find my camera and microphone, but please proceed.
Okay, well, briefly, this motion for clarification is styled as an emergency because the district says that it needs to give its materials to the Department of Education for feedback in advance of the May meeting. What it is asking for clarification about is your expectations for what the district presents on Adams City High School. As you may remember from your scheduling notice back in February, there was a footnote that said the state board will not be considering any SRP recommendation on Adams City High School at your March or at your April hearing on the district. In the April hearing, you passed a motion directing the district about Adams City High School and what you wanted to hear on that. And so the district is now looking for clarification. Ms. Maramba provided a response on Tuesday that we at the Attorney General's office vetted. I'll turn it back to you, Chairwoman Schroeder.
Thank you. So I think we need to formally accept that emergency motion. Do I have a motion so that we can vote on accepting that?
Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
Board Member Esser? Go
I
ahead.
move to grant Adams 14's emergency motion for clarification to ratify the State Board Office's April 26, 2022 response as the requested clarification.
Thank you. That is a proper motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion, colleagues? Ms. Maramba, could you please call the vote?
Board Member Durham,
Yes.
Board Member Skarziga,
Yes.
Board Member Esser,
Yes.
Board Member McCollin,
Yes.
Board Member Rankin,
Yes.
Board Member Shuffle,
Yes.
Board Member Schroeder.
Yes,
That passes 7-0.
great. So,
Yes, we're going to try it again, Madam Chair. Deputy Commissioner Pearson will try to share her screen and hope that we got it unfrozen.
Okay, I think so. Thank you. Everybody was so helpful trying to problem solve. I appreciate it. Can you guys see my screen now?
yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Showing up? Okay, awesome. My computer's not frozen, so we are all set. Maybe that's the hardest part of today, this conversation and this presentation, but I don't think so. So we're here to talk to you a little bit about transportation options to reduce barriers to public school choice. Really focused on systems that have seen persistent challenges, those that are in districts that have board directed action. So it's kind of a very narrow focus that we're talking about today. So we have a few goals for today. One, to provide you an overview of the options that we've researched. Then to have time for you all to discuss and ask questions. And finally, to see if you all would like staff to move forward with any of these options provided. You don't need to move forward with any of them. You can move forward with both. It's all up to you. You can move forward with one of them. So we'll talk through what that is as we go today. So just to give you a little bit more context, we had, as the commissioner talked about, we had some requests from board members to research options for ways that we could reduce barriers to public school choice in struggling systems. I think one of the things we saw in the public comment in the Adams 14 hearing was that transportation is a real barrier that families face for school choice or going to any other different school than the neighborhood and close by school. And so that's something that CDE has looked into of what could we do there for students and families. So I just want to stop, and Katie thanks everybody, but I really want to say thank you to our staff and to the AG's office that helped sort through this. There's complexity with transportation requirements, procurement requirements, grant requirements, how we could use ESSER funds because it's the ESSER funding that we have available for this. So it was really complicated, and we have a lot of staff members on today because it does get very complicated very quickly. So I just want to highlight Melissa Bloom and Katie Lanahoff from the policy team did a tremendous amount of research into options side by side with our AG staff, with Isabel and Joe and Julie. And then we've got our operations staff from CDE, Kate Bartlett and Jennifer Oakes, who know transportation, who know procurement, who know grants, that are here, can help us dig into all of that as well. Our comms team is also helping us think through, if you all move forward, how do we talk about this? Because there's complicated aspects of who might be eligible and who might not. And so we want to be able to not cause more confusion for families if we move forward with anything. So CDE team, if there are things that come up today while I'm talking, if I mistakenly get something wrong or I'm not precise enough, please feel free to put that in chat right away so we can make sure I don't cause more confusion. And board members, you all, please feel free to raise your hands or come off mute and ask questions as we go, because there's a lot of information in here. And I know sometimes it's easier just to get a question clarified in the moment than to hold on it. And I don't mind at all. I'd rather make sure we get you the information you need today. So with that, just know also that this is all a work in progress. So we're still working through trying to understand all the caveats. CD doesn't run any programs like these currently. So we're learning a lot as we go, and there's still things to be developed. If you all want to move forward and keep going with any of these ideas. Okay. So with that said, we do have two options to talk to you all about today. One is a transportation token program that is in statute. It's been in statute since 2000. It's changed over time, but it's been there. And another is just a direct ESSER grant opportunity. Regardless of either of these paths that you take, the funding that we have available are ESSER funds. And we want to just make sure you know that ESSER funds have requirements on how you use them and what they can be used for and how much for different categories and all of that. So with anything with ESSER funds, the state needs to justify how the need for that expenditure has been caused by or exacerbated by the pandemic and how that expenditure is addressing the identified need there. Additionally, those ESSER funds are only usable until September of 24. So whatever we do with those funds, we basically have funding for the 22-23 school year and 23-24 school year. So it'd be a short-term 2-year opportunity that we'd have with that money. Both of the programs that we're looking at are looking for options for both within district transportation, within that same district, or out of district transportation. Within district transportation is a little bit more straightforward. It's a little more direct to facilitate. Across district transportation has some additional challenges. There's a separate state law that prohibits a neighboring district from providing transportation services across district boundaries to a non-resident student without the prior consent of the student's district of residence. So you can do it, it's another layer of ensuring that the district of residence gives approval for that. So, and those two things, those caveats around ESSER and cross-district transportation apply to both these options we have for you today. I'm gonna stop and look at chat, make sure nobody has anything. So this, I want to give you a little bit more detail. We're going to kind of talk about what the program is for both these programs, what kind of direction we would need from the board, and any barriers or challenges we're seeing with them. So the first one, what's in statute. I've got my book here and open. I've been spending lots of time with it, reading and rereading it as we find things. What the program does is it would provide transportation resources for eligible students. The way eligibility is defined is for students in grades 1st through 8, so it doesn't go to high school, it's not kindergarten, it's 1st through 8, who are eligible for free or reduced price lunch and either enrolled in or assigned to priority improvement or turnaround schools. That's what's written in statute. The program would give transportation tokens to attend non-priority improvement or turnaround schools either within the district or in other districts. And to implement it, the state board must promulgate rules. So that's what we're here talking to you about today, if you want to consider that. In the draft rules we provided for you, we added a prioritization in there that because we have limited funds and knowing why you all are kind of coming at this, that it would be prioritized for schools that are in districts at year 5 or beyond on the accountability clock. So really intended for places where systems have not yet been able to meet student needs fully. And then the other thing we added into the rules is it incorporates some other transportation requirements that already exist, other state board rules that already exist, but just making sure that those are connected to this program. And those things could be changed. We needed to start somewhere with a draft for you. Okay. So there's a few challenges with this, using the ESSER funds with this statute, and we just want to be really clear with you all on that. Right now, as the statute's written and the way ESSER funds work, we don't think we can make this work together without statutory change. We can get into more details if you guys want. Jennifer Oakes knows very well and can explain this probably better than me. But basically, the way ESSER funds work as a reimbursement program is not how the fund is set up in the statute. In addition, the General Assembly needs to appropriate the funds in statute. So if we want to go this route, you guys could still notice it today, but we would have to go immediately. Jennifer Mello knows, she knows that I'm talking about this, but we'd have to immediately go work and do some statutory change. So that's the biggest challenge, and want you to know that. Another challenge is the timeline and procurement. We've been making an assumption that if you all did this, you'd want it started before the 22-23 school year. We know there's a lot of research that multiple school changes are not good for kids, that kind of transition. I don't think we'd want to create a program that would create an incentive or create a means for even more school change and upheaval. And so we've been trying to work on how do we get this in a timeline that could happen. Families could select and have this sorted out before the 22-23 school year started. So if we are working on that understanding, we could have intergovernmental contracts ready for providers. That would be a school district or RTD as a transportation provider. Because of the timeline it takes for intergovernmental contracts, that could be ready before the 22-23 school year. But to be able to do any private transportation, which would require procurement on CDE's part, that just takes longer. And we don't think we'd be able to get that done until November. So in the future, like you could do it for later in the year, you could do it for a future school year to have that other option for procurement. But just if we want to have things at the start of the school year, that's a limitation or challenge we have. Then we just felt like we need to put this caveat. This is a new program. It would be a new program. It's nothing like what we've done at CDE before directly. We're pulling on a lot of different expertise and putting something together new. So we just know there might be administrative hurdles or legal issues that we're not anticipating, and just want to put that caveat out there. And then again, we talked just a little bit earlier, ESSER funds 2-year funding. And so it's not a sustainable source for this program or for families. So it might create a way that families would have options for 2 years, but may not for beyond that if we couldn't find more funding, if you all wanted to continue it, the legislature wanted to. So some of the challenges that we've discovered as we've gone through this. So if you all wanted to move forward, here's a timeline of how things could work. If you want to consider and have this option open for the rules to implement the statute, you really do need to notice today. If we don't notice today, given the requirements of rulemaking and the timelines associated with it, we wouldn't be able to make it work, have things in place before the start of the school year. You may want to do rulemaking for other reasons, but if you want to be able to implement for the start of the school year, we need to make that notice today. So if you voted to notice today, then we would madly try and see what we could go do across the street. And we'd know in a week and a half whether we were able to do anything or not, and have that information. If things are still moving, you all can have a rulemaking hearing on June 8th and 9th, or you could decide we're done, we don't want to move forward with this anymore. If you had the rulemaking hearing on June 8th or 9th, the rules would be in effect on July 15th. And then CDE could implement for the start of the 22-23 school year. Again, with the caveat that it wouldn't be limited to intergovernmental providers. And then again, only if we got the statutory change regarding how we can use these federal funds for the program. I'm going to stop there for a sec before we go into the other option and see if you all have any questions about this one.
Colleagues, I don't see all of you, so please jump in if you have a question. Board Member Durham.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a question. I think it's a good idea to try and preserve this option. So I think we should proceed with the notice of rulemaking full well understanding that we may not be in fact able to make rules on this topic without a statutory change. And but I'd hate to have us not preserve all of the possible options for us.
Thank you. Board Member Esser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I agree with Member Durham. We need to at least keep the option open. One concern I have, that if we keep the rulemaking open, we could discuss it at that time. And this is probably for Deputy Commissioner Pearson. If it's only for 2 years, you could have a kid decide to go to middle school in Adams 12, for example, and then 8th grade, they have to flip back to one of the middle schools in Adams 14. Or is CDE thinking more that we'd find a way to continue this once we start it? Hard
That's a-
question, I know.
No, it's a good question, and I think there's multiple layers to that. So let me do my best, and if I don't get all the points of it, please remind me. So if we use what's in statute, there's only 3 schools in Adams 14 that would be eligible in the district. There's 3 elementary schools. So if a student was in middle school, they wouldn't be eligible for the transportation resources. Clearly, we have public school choice in the state. They can choice in. And if the funding ended, they could continue to stay in the school they're in. Even if it's elementary, they could stay wherever. There just wouldn't be resources to provide that transportation, which we know is a barrier for families. At least that's what we've heard in public comment. I think it is completely up to you all if you would want to find other sources of funding to continue the program. I don't know. I think that's direction we'd need from the board as a whole if you would want the department to do that, to look for that to be able to be ongoing. And that's for either program, right?
Okay.
Did that answer all the parts of your question?
It did. And since they're my funds, you have permission to use them. Just kidding. Thank you.
Can we tell the U.S. Department of Ed that?
Yes.
Scott, did you hear that? Did you hear what she said?
Any other questions? Ms. Pearson, go on, please.
Okay, thank you. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the ideas we've come to on the ESSER grant opportunity. So again, same money, same requirements, but instead of going through what's in statute with the program that's laid out and has its requirements, you all could create. You'd have more flexibility in creating what your priorities are and where you want it, but it would be a grant opportunity. So let me talk to you a little bit more about what that would be, or could be. And again, there's a lot of discretion here, as long as we make sure we are in line with the uses of ESSER funds. So this is a new grant program. It could provide transportation resources for students in low-performing schools and systems. You could consider eligibility for students who are free reduced cost lunch, enrolled in or assigned to a neighborhood school that is required to implement a priority improvement or turnaround plan. And you could, or within a school district that has been accredited with a priority improvement plan or turnaround plan for at least 5 consecutive years. So that's eligibility you can consider. Because this is not, this is your discretion, not what's in statute. You could expand this to high school. So you could do this K-12, whereas what's in statute is really limited right now for 1st through 8th grade. Or you could do it for any student in a district that's at 5 years or beyond. You can do it no matter what the school performance is, you could do anybody in that district. So you'd have some discretion there. Again, we just need to make sure we can justify the use of the ESSER funds to show that there are needs for students that were exacerbated or created by the pandemic. Okay, let me talk to you a little bit more about where we need direction from you. And here I think we need a lot more direction because there's a lot more options because there's not statute behind it. So we'd really want to hear from you on that eligibility and your priority criteria for participating students. Who would you want this to apply for? And then we would really need some input from you all on eligibility criteria for grantees. Like, would you want districts to apply for this, and or transportation providers, and or coordinating organizations, and or families? We think, knowing ESSER, that all of those could be eligible grantees. We'd have to be really thoughtful and careful about how that's done. I do want to say that having families be the grantees is something CDE has not done, and we don't currently have infrastructure for that. So that just would be a bigger lift on our end to try and figure out how to make that work directly. And we'd have all the ESSER requirements like we've talked about, but we would need your feedback on this to know how to structure any grant application we made. So a few more considerations on this. This would be a grant program. And so with a grant program, the participation would be optional by providers or districts, whoever you made the grantees. So it would be dependent upon if anybody applies for it and who applies then. So that's a big consideration. There'd be a pretty quick turnaround in being able to get this up and going for the start of the 22-23 school year. And again, sorry, keep saying this, but it would create, it'd be a new program for CDE, it would have some new work, administrative needs. It would be for a short period of time, but it would be these increased needs for us. And again, 2-year timeline. Okay, before I go on to recap the options and just you all, what questions do you have about the grant opportunity kind of pathway?
Colleagues, questions?
Yeah, this is Lisa Scarsiga. I think this is the one that maybe throws me a little more in just that who would be potentially a grantee? You can't be a neighboring district who gets money to buy buses to go across the line and pick up kids in another district because that's against state statute. If that district B, if District A wants to go run a bus into District B, they can't do it without District B's permission. I'm trying to figure out who's the grantees in this piece that this is going to work. This one kind of throws me a little more. I'm just trying to visualize what you're thinking on this.
Sure. So Lisa, with the district grantee part of it, I think we would create an application that a district would only put in their application if they already had approval from the District A's local board. So it would have to be, it'd be part of the process. So that's the district kind of idea of they could be grantees. I think the other options we had on there of transportation providers or a coordinating organization, those would be some other options. I see Vice Chair Durham's hand up, so I can.
Mr. Durham, go ahead.
I think one of the possibilities there are 501c3 nonprofit organizations that provide services to children that would perhaps be very interested in such a program and that are capable of administering a program like this and providing transportation and entering into contracts with providers that could meet the criteria established by the board for student safety and deliver the transportation results to the benefit of those children using ESSER funds.
Any other questions? Board Member Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to throw out a hypothetical, and maybe our rulemaking would cover this, but let's just say we have a small district, but they are on district turnaround. They've been on it for 5 years. And students at the lowest end decide, because they have this opportunity, to go to another district next door. Do their academic scores now go to that new district, or do they go to the original district? And if all of a sudden those scores at the original district improve, do these kids have to come back? Does that make sense?
That does make sense. I'm trying to think through. So in terms of how we do calculations for accountability, student scores go to the school and district that they're enrolled in.
Yes.
As long as they've been there, since the beginning of the school year, it goes there. So for that piece of it, I think, and Isabel, if you're on, want to weigh in terms of what's in statute. If the school or the district that they were in that caused them to be eligible, that created the eligibility for them to leave, gets a higher rating in that time period. I don't know if the statute says how that would be handled, and with the rules, I think you guys could decide how you wanted to do that. But Isabel, I'm going to look to you and see if you've got advice here.
Sure. This is Isabel again. Statute does say that an eligible student under the transportation token program will no longer receive those transportation tokens under statute if the neighborhood school, which was required to implement the priority improvement or turnaround plan, moves up a level on the SPF. So it's more under statute about the SPF, the school performance framework, than it is the district performance framework. I think you could, in your rules, adopt some additional eligibility criteria that focuses also on the district performance framework.
And Madam Chair, one more question. If I think of how the legislature can do pilot programs or whatever. Is there any way we could, I don't know, sunset or whatever, but try it? Because we might like to do something like this, and then after a couple years or more, and I'm assuming we would get some accountability for those students that moved, how they're doing. I don't, just the accountability of including this in there is questionable to me, because we want to know if it's successful and if it makes a difference. And I don't know if we would do it by rule or how we would do that, but I think I really like the idea, but there's a lot of ifs in there. In 2 years or 3 years, and then the student has to come back. I mean, we talk about changing schools as being disruptive. We're almost building that in. Those are just some of my concerns. I don't know if they make any sense.
Board Member McClellan, thank you. Board Member McClellan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Am I correct? Just getting into the nitty-gritty of exactly how the tokens work. Do those go to the parents directly and then the parents use the tokens with the transportation provider? Or is this structured in a way that school districts distribute the funds in the form of these tokens through their contractors?
That is a great question, and we've been working to sort through that all. And Isabel, I'd love it if you pop back on, if you don't mind, in case I get this wrong. In the statute, the understanding is that families would apply for tokens. They would get, a token, something to hold on to. They would turn that token in to the provider, whoever that is, if that's providing the transportation. And then the transportation fund would reimburse them for that token. Would reimburse the provider, not the family.
Can I just give a little feedback there?
Yeah.
By structuring it that way, it may remove from the equation the possibility of one of the legitimate competitors, some of our more traditional school transportation providers, from participating. Now, I understand that there could be barriers based on pupil count and routes that might make that more challenging in some instances. But in those instances where it might have worked, particularly given that elementary schools typically pull from a relatively geographically condensed area anyway, it might theoretically have been possible for one of our traditionally regulated transportation providers to have made this work on a route with a relatively concentrated pupil population, if they had enough kids needing the same starting area or city block going to the same destination, kind of like Dial-A-Ride does with RTD. But if we're having the tokens go through the parents, that makes it a little more difficult for that model to work. Is it possible to offer a dual model so that we're not cutting a legitimate provider out of the possibility of competing for the ability to supply these services when they might do a fine job in some instances?
Isabel or Jennifer Oakes, do either of you want to address that? I think those are possibilities, but I would rather defer to them because they understand the ins and outs of this much better than I do.
Jennifer, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I think we could do a dual model that would, just add to the complexity of it to run dual models, and so that might make it more complex. But I definitely, see the point that you're raising, and it's a valid one.
I can appreciate that it might be slightly more complex right on the front end, but once that's set up, then we avoid the appearance of favoring one business model over another or one vendor over another, which I think is pretty important, not to mention the fact that there are other advantages when you don't create an intentional or unintentional monopoly. It's better for us to provide the wider variety of services if we want to have success in getting kids moved from A to B safely.
And just to note on that, Board Member McClellan, if you all went with the transportation token pathway with what's in statute, with the timelines we have right now, for the start of the 22-23 school year, we'd only be able to serve intergovernment or be able to do transportation with intergovernmental agencies. So only with like districts and RTD. We wouldn't be able to do any of those others at this point because of the procurement timelines. For the following year, we could figure something out like that.
Deputy Commissioner Pearson, I want to make sure I'm understanding what you just said. In other words, the direct parent token pathway would not yet be up and ready to run, or were you indicating that? Can you maybe restate that?
Yeah, Jennifer, do you? I'm trying to watch your face. Do you want to take it?
No, you start.
Okay. So we could do tokens for the start of the year, but only for intergovernmental agencies, because we need to have some kind of contractor arrangement with whoever is providing the transportation for those tokens. And the way we can get money out the door to people for a provider that's not a government agency like districts or RTD, we need to do a procurement process. And that takes a lot longer than an intergovernmental contract.
And so if it was through a district, then the district could determine how to provide that transportation, either have a bus driver do a route, or to reimburse parents, or to get RTD eco-passes, or to contract with a vendor to provide it, or all of the above, depending on family by family, what works. So, but then our agreement would just be with that district to provide those transportations. And so, does that help?
Do we have any, well, I guess we have to ask ourselves if we have any obligation to ensure that the maximum competitiveness is preserved if we don't want to unwittingly drive a provider of safe transportation services, properly regulated safe transportation services out of the picture for an increasing number of rides and routes. So just a thought, it's something we may want to weigh if we want to encourage or even require the maximization of the variety of methods by which these can be utilized.
Board Member Skarzica.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to respond to Member Rankin's question about the pilot program. And so those of us who've done this for a very long time, have been around, remember that 20 years ago, this actually was a program under NCLB. Districts who had schools, this is actually the initial legislation, I believe, was developed off of the original NCLB. So districts were required to offer transportation within the district to any student whose school was on the clock. I don't remember us calling him priority improvement and turnaround back in 2000, but probably, which is, I'm kind of curious why the statute reads so currently. But anyway, and so we did that. All districts that took Title I funds had to do that across the nation. And then it was within the last, it's got to be 10 years ago, where the feds dropped that requirement because an analysis showed that it didn't actually end up benefiting or changing students' experiences or improve achievement, whatever it was. Parents, especially in Aurora where we were, we did have some parents that took us up on this, and we had for several years, we would transport them across the district. But eventually, a lot of districts had no parents that wanted to take them up on that. They don't want their kids going across districts. So anyway, to your question, pilot, this actually has been done within districts. It's doable because we did it for years. Across districts, it was not done because that was not a requirement, and the state statute doesn't allow it. But maybe Ms. Oakes probably remembers that if you go back, were you here 20 years ago? Yes? Everybody? Yes.
Yep, I remember it. Thank you. Board Member Rankin?
Yes, would there be a limitation on distance with this? Because, you know, some of my school districts are hours apart.
Oh, Jennifer, you're on mute.
Isabel might be able to best address this because we had emailed about that.
That's right. Under the statute, so this is for the transportation token program that already exists. There is some, I would say, competing language in the statute. One part of it says you get to go to the nearest school. Other parts of the statute say it is up to the family to choose which school to go to. So without getting into legal advice too much, my sense is that you could, in your rules, impose some sort of geographic limit or choose not to and say it is fully a parental choice. This may be an area that we might want to think about working with the legislature to make some changes if you go that route. If you go the route of an ESSER grant fund, that would be completely up to you to design that sort of criteria in terms of geographic distance.
Thank you.
Board Member Durham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think both these concepts are new and really uncharted waters that I think are going to require a lot more work to flesh out in terms of details. And the amount of money available, if any, is still a little bit up in the air. I think at least what I would like to accomplish by preserving both these options is to be able to implement some programs to help kids in distressed districts or in distressed schools in the coming school year. And so that puts us on a tighter time frame and causes us at least to take this first action without fully knowing as much as we would ordinarily know about either rulemaking or considering how best to construct a grant application. But and if I look at what we've done with ESSER money up to this point, we approved, I think, if you remember, in the original $130 million, we approved. Excuse me. We approved we approved the use of money to provide grants for example, high intensity tutoring. I doubt we have any specific legislative authorization to do that, but it clearly fits within the purpose of the ESSER grants, and so I don't think we need specific legislative authorization to do that. And I think we could probably authorize a transportation program, provided it didn't conflict with state law. Now, and that at least gives us, I think, a number of options. There are some things that we can do to transport children that districts cannot do because of the prohibition against a district doing something. Prohibition is not necessarily applicable to the department. And so I think all I hope to do in keeping both of these options is to hopefully do something good for kids in this August and September, as opposed to a year from now. And I think we are stuck with these programs that probably at most, given the ESSER funding available, probably can only last a year or two. And there's going to be, but I think it's fair to say that at least in some districts we have what we could certainly term a crisis. And so I think we have a significant justification for pursuing all of these options, and the details, I think, to all the questions that have been asked will have to be worked out, but we need a lot more time to work those out. And ultimately it'll be it's a board decision to decide A, if you want to proceed, and B, under what restrictions you want to proceed in terms of eligibility and how you provide the transportation. And there are parents today, for example, that choose to send their kids to other districts and they sometimes drive them themselves. There are those that have Uber drive them. I mean, there are a number of different options out there. So I think if we approach this with how many options can we make available to help children this August and this September as opposed to a year from now. So I'd hope we'd support keeping both these options open, recognizing that we're asking the department to do a fair amount of work, and we may hit a dead end, and the work unfortunately will have been for naught. But at least I think we've done our due diligence to try and put ourselves in a position where we can help students this year.
Thank you. Board Member Skarzica?
No, I didn't have my hand raised, so.
Okay, now it's off. Thank you.
Okay.
Board Member McClellan?
Ditto, I left my hand up, sorry.
Board Member Rankin?
I don't think my hand is up. I put it down.
It is.
No.
It's okay. Yeah.
Never mind.
Now it's gone.
Okay.
It's okay, colleagues. All right, Deputy Commissioner Pearson, further comments that you have, and then I'll bring it back to us to discuss.
Sure. I had one last slide just to show, because I'm so visual, with options for you all. So you can notice the rules today, and with that, I think we'd assume that means work for a statutory change to make the rules possibly work. From there, not for today, but in the future, you know that you can continue with the rulemaking process, or you can decide to discontinue it in the future, but you can notice today. And or you can continue to direct us to continue to develop an ESSER grant opportunity, and we can come back to you in May with some more of the details and on the points where we would need some direction from you all. Or you could decide not to move forward with either of these. So it's kind of what we have laid out for you all. If anybody has another great, wonderful idea, we can go do some work and research it. We're learning a lot. So even if we end up in a dead end, we'll have learned a lot about a lot of things in our state education system.
Thank you very much.
That's what I have. I will
I think we'll
turn
take
this
a few
back to you all
minutes now, maybe go
for further
down the
discussion.
line. Were you finished? You were suddenly muted. Okay.
Oh, I'm all good. Thank you.
I think this came up as a part of comments among us publicly that we are so limited in options available to help kids. And this is hopefully one other option that we can use, because our focus is to provide the best opportunities for kids, especially in a district with challenges. So I hope you realize that's the thought that sort of went into
Madam Chair, I believe we're having audio problems with you. So I think the question might be, Vice Chair. I think we'll just call for a motion, if there's a motion.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'll make a motion if it's okay. Give me a thumbs up there. I move to approve notice of rulemaking for the transportation resources for students in low-performing school programs, 1 CCR 301-114, as presented by staff today, and to work for the necessary changes to our ESSER funds rules to use ESSER funds rules for this purpose.
It's a proper motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion, colleagues?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
My computer went out for just a few seconds. Could I ask that the motion be repeated?
Sure.
You can ask, but you might not get it.
I'll do my best here. I'm reading it, so there's a chance. I move to approve notice of rulemaking for the transportation resources for students in low-performing school programs, 1 CCR 301-114, as presented by staff today, and work for necessary statutory changes to use our ESSER funds for this purpose.
Thank you.
Do I have a second?
I seconded.
Thank you. Any further discussion, colleagues, or should I call the vote? Ms. Maramba?
Board Member Durham.
Yes.
Board Member Skarziga.
No.
Board Member Esser.
Yes.
Board McClellan.
Yes.
Board Member Rankin.
Yes.
Board Member Shuffle.
Yes.
Board Member Schroeder.
Yes.
That passes 6-1.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Durham, go ahead.
I move to direct the department to pursue creation of new grant program to provide transportation options to certain students in low performing schools using ESSER funds. The board can discuss this further at its regular May meeting.
Thank you. That's a proper motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this one? Ms. Maramba, would you please call the vote?
Board Member Durham.
Yes.
Board Member Skarziga.
No.
Board Member Esser.
Yes.
Board Member McClellan.
Yes.
Board Member Rankin.
Yes.
Board Member Shuffle.
Yes.
Board Member Schroeder.
Yes.
That passes 6-1.
Thank you. Unless there are further comments, we stand adjourned until our meeting on May 9th. Is it now May 9th?
No, I believe.
It's May 10th.
Is it May 10th?
Tuesday, May 10th.
Correct.
Yeah, Tuesday, May 10th.
Madam Chair, can I just make one comment?
Please do, Commissioner.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that good discussion. I do just want to say our board materials are due on Monday. And so creating a grant program over the weekend with some complexity is difficult. So I'm going to ask for a little bit of patience with you all to get these board materials to you a little bit later than all your other board materials.
Granted.
Yep.
Board Member McClellan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify, Commissioner, although we're getting the materials prior to our May meeting, we won't be having a vote on this until June. Am I correct?
That I'm not sure about.
That's actually a really important point that I clarified with the attorney ahead of time, and I want to make sure that I'm right because there is a contingency that is pretty critical.
Madam Chair, do you mind if I jump in? Okay, thank you. So for the rules, going the statutory route with the rules, that will not have a vote till June. If you all want to vote on it, and we'll know by then if we have gotten statutory change or not. For the discussion in May about the grant program and that pathway, you don't, I don't know. We'll have to think about what kind of, how formal of a direction or a vote we need from you in May to keep moving forward with this short timeline that we have before the start of the school year. But we will definitely need to get some direction from you all in May on components for the grant program. We won't have a like, here's the RFP ready to go. We're going to have some pretty specific questions for you all on, you know, who do you want to be the grantees? Who do you want to be eligible? And get that kind of direction is what we'll need for May.
I did not realize we were going to, when I voted on this, I didn't realize that was going to occur in May. It was my understanding that we'd be having the substantive discussion in June. So the end of the session will be Wednesday, May 11th, at which moment we will then definitely know by midnight what amendments may or may not have been stripped from Senate Bill 144 so that I can more honestly gauge whether or not we're dealing with a provider that meets the safety criterion that I might be comfortable with. And maybe I'm the only board member who cares about that the way that I do, but maybe there are others. And my hope is that we could schedule a substantive discussion for Thursday in light of the fact that that would then allow us to have those questions settled by virtue of the fact that the session will end at midnight on Wednesday, if that's possible.
I defer to your board director, Maramba, but I think I think we should be able to make that work. But Angela, tell me if you aren't comfortable with that.
No, we can definitely make that work.
Board
Madam
Member
Chair?
Durham.
Thank you. I think since this is a grant program, we can write many of our own safety criteria in there if there are, if they don't seem to be appropriate ones in statute. So I think on our general authority, we can probably tweak this to a way that everybody could get comfortable with safety issues.
Board Member McClellan, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just note it's going to be a pretty rapid turnaround potentially, because theoretically we could see late breaking news as late as just before midnight on Wednesday. So my hope is that if we need to have that full robust discussion on Thursday, that we're able to be agile and respond to whatever has happened during this session that might inform our conversation. So thank you so much.
Madam Chair, you're having audio issues, so I'll let Mr. Vice Chair close out the meeting.
Let's see. We'll stand adjourned till 9 or till 12 noon, Tuesday, May 10th. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. You all too.
Thank you.